The film opens with a man repeatedly knocking on a door. Miles Raymond, a grumpy middle-aged teacher, opens the door to find his neighbor requesting him to move his poorly parked car. For a Saturday morning, Miles shows tremendous strength to even get out of bed, let alone transfer his car from one spot to another. He rushes back to his apartment and realizes he's late for his meetup. He calls his friend and gives several excuses for his delay. He blatantly lies that he's rushing out of the door, but in reality, he leisurely performs his morning routine. You would think he would be at his meeting quickly. After this, he departs, but he stops to get breakfast instead. Finally, he makes the drive from San Diego to Los Angeles. This guy lives by his name, doesn't he? He parks outside a mansion and steps inside to meet his friend, Jack Cole, and his prospective in-laws. Jack is a charismatic but washed-up middle-aged actor who is marrying Christine Organian, a rich realtor's daughter. They sarcastically comment on his tardiness. Miles gives the most creative excuse ever about the traffic he encountered on the freeway. Christine is just glad he made it, completely oblivious to his lies. She offers him a cake, a perfectly reasonable Saturday afternoon meal. Mrs. Organian congratulates him for publishing his book. He gives a side-eye to Jack and corrects her that he hasn't finalized it yet, but there has been some interest. Jack tells him not to be modest and to indulge them a little. He describes it as a fiction novel, but a little autobiographical. As a perfectly civil response, Mr. Organian says he prefers nonfiction. He thinks reading something somebody invented is a waste of time. Miles thinks it's an interesting perspective, but clearly doesn't agree. When asked what he prefers, he chooses fiction. Later, Jack and Miles leave the house. Jack is annoyed that Miles came late. They were supposed to be 100 miles away by this time. Jack doesn't buy his traffic excuse and knows he's hungover. Miles admits that he went to a wine tasting the previous night, only because he wanted to bring something for the ride. Jack grabs the bottle of white wine and examines it. Miles isn't pleased about the fact that Jack told them about his novel since he doesn't have a publisher yet. He only mentioned that there was some interest in a publishing house. Jack wants to be supportive, but Miles would rather manage his expectations. Jack starts opening the wine, but Miles wants him to wait. He cracks it open anyway, which pisses Miles off. However, as a true wine lover, he begins to enjoy the wine and gives him a few tips about it. Miles wants to know if he read the latest draft of his book. Jack thinks it's an improvement and showers it with compliments, but Miles catches him on his bluff. He clearly didn't read it. We don't blame him. There will be another draft. Later, they make a quick stop in Oxnard. Miles wants to surprise his mother and wish her on her birthday eve. His mother is delighted to see Miles, and even more to see Jack. She loves that a famous actor like him has come to wish her well and congratulates him on his upcoming wedding. She excuses herself to get changed and look more presentable. She wants to know if they'd like to eat dinner with her. Miles wants to eat a snack, but Jack would rather get going. Shortly afterward, we find Miles and Jack eating dinner as Miles's mother insists that they should stay the night. She had already made plans for her birthday brunch the next day and invited the rest of the family. Miles doesn't seem pleased with this idea, but doesn't want to directly turn her down. He excuses himself and goes up to her room. He rummages through his mom's cupboard and steals a few $100s from her. He comes back to the table to find his mom probing Jack about his wedding. She changes the topic to Miles. She wants him to get remarried. He reminds her that he just got divorced, but his mother truly wants him to get back with Victoria, his ex-wife, because she believes she was good for him. She is worried about him and asks him if he needs some money. The next morning, Miles quietly wakes Jack up, and they leave to avoid attending the family gathering. Maybe the real surprise here was Miles not being the greatest son after all. They get breakfast and Miles catches Jack ogling the waitress. Miles tells him to be careful as these flirtations come at a heavy price. Jack thinks he should put himself back out there, but Miles, as his best man, wants the forthcoming week to be all about Jack. He wants them to consume good food and wine, play golf, and enjoy the scenery. But Jack thinks Miles should just find a girl for the week. They take a detour for Santa Barbara, and Miles believes it's the perfect place for Pinot Noir. He shows Jack how to smell and taste the wine. As Miles smells it and explains the notes, Jack looks clueless. He can barely smell anything and just wants to drink it. They head back on the road and Jack asks Miles if he thinks he's making a mistake by getting married to Christine. Miles is taken aback by the question, but Jack presses him for his opinion due to his experience being married. Miles urges him to trust his judgment and hold on to the reason he decided to get married to Christine in the first place. He adds that he should keep his eyes open anyway, since he thought Victoria and him were going to spend their lives together. Jack adds that Christine's dad wants to bring him into his property business. He thinks it would be a good stable income, while he can do commercials or acting gigs as a side hustle. Good for Jack. He's definitely talking about money here. They get to a restaurant where they make their own wine. The owner asks Miles for his opinion, and he compliments it. Jack makes a toast to his last week of freedom. As they sit down to eat dinner, Jack points at the waitress and asks Miles to consider her. Miles knows Maya since he visits the restaurant often. Jack is surprised that he hangs out with her but hasn't slept with someone as attractive as her. Miles points out that he has seen a ring on her finger, but Jack thinks it doesn't mean anything. He mentions how Christine would wear a fake ring, just so that men didn't hit on her, but he still did. Miles tells him not to assume anything about Maya. Right at the moment, Maya comes to their table. She tells Miles he looks good and asks him if he has lost weight. He thanks her for the compliment, and Maya goes back to work. This is all that Jack needed to know, that Maya is into Miles. Miles adds that she knows a lot about wine as well. However, he thinks he can't make it work with a waitress, but Jack wants him to focus on the positives. Later that night, Miles and Jack continue to drink more wine at the restaurant's bar. Maya gets done with work and takes a seat at the bar. Miles shoots his shot and asks her if she wants to join them. She accepts his invitation and asks him how his book is coming along. He announces that he has finished writing it. Jack, being a good friend, tells Maya that it's getting published, and that's why they are celebrating. Maya congratulates him. She asks Jack if he's also a writer, but Jack clarifies that he's an actor. She asks them about their plans for the rest of the night. Miles says they are wiped out and want to go back to the motel. Jack looks visibly displeased. While they walk back, Jack blasts Miles for turning down her obvious call to spend more time with him. But Miles is tired and doesn't want to lie to her about his novel. Then Jack gives him a crucial piece of information. Maya was not wearing a ring when she was at the bar with them. The next morning, they get breakfast, and Jack declares that he wants to sleep with someone on this trip and doesn't want Miles to screw it up for him. Miles gets angry and asks him to continue this road trip alone. In his naturally persuasive manner, he coaxes him into sharing this rare experience together. They visit various vineyards and try different wines. At one particular winery, they meet a sommelier named Stephanie. Jack immediately starts flirting with her. He asks her if she knows Maya and arranges a double date. He even finds out from Stephanie that Maya has been divorced for a year. Sure, Jack, keep up your flirtations, and you're most likely headed this way too. They drive to the hitching post where Miles recounts his picnic date with his ex-wife Victoria. He remembers her vast knowledge of wine. This is when Jack drops the bomb on Miles. He tells him that Victoria is coming to his wedding with her husband. Miles freaks out and wants to go home. He finds out that Jack has been in touch with Victoria and has a complete meltdown. He takes a bottle of wine and starts running towards the vineyard. Jack chases him until Miles runs out of breath. They say nothing to each other. Miles spots a batch of grapes and holds them. Afterward, in their motel room, Miles is moping and watching TV. He is woken up by Jack later in the evening. They head over to their double date. Before entering, Jack tells him not to sabotage the date for him. He requests him not to get drunk and not weird them out by objecting to drinking Merlot. He loses his cool over the mention of Merlot. Sorry, Miles. We underestimated you and your passion for wine. They go inside and sit down at the table where Maya and Stephanie are already seated. Miles and Maya bond over wine. Jack seems relieved watching this date go rather well, until there comes a point where Miles does get drunk and starts to spiral. He excuses himself and makes a drunk call to Victoria. He tells her he heard she got remarried. She can tell that he's drunk. He starts talking about the wines he drank, and he remembered her when he went to the hitching post. She tells him not to call her when he's drunk. He says he has decided not to come to the wedding. It's his little wedding gift to her. She says it's probably better if he doesn't come to the wedding. He hangs up despairingly. He comes back to the table, and the women excuse themselves to go to the restroom. Jack asks him to get his shit together and reminds him not to screw this up. He asks him if he called Victoria, but Miles denies it. Jack compels him to forget about Victoria. He should focus on Maya. He reminds her about the bad times with Victoria and how small she made him feel, which led to his extramarital affair. This presses the wrong nerve, and Miles tells him to shut up. Furthermore, Jack stresses the fact that Maya is interested in him, and he shouldn't let go of this chance. The women return to the table, and Miles asks them if they should order desserts, but Stephanie suggests that they could go back to her place. In excitement, Jack lets out a roar like a lion cub, which for some inexplicable reason isn't a deal breaker for Stephanie. Later, Jack and Miles arrive at Stephanie's house. Before they enter, Jack hands Miles a condom. After this, Jack leaps at Stephanie and kisses her. She sends Miles in Maya's direction, where she is sifting through the wine cooler. They pick out a Syrah. Maya asks him about the gems he has in his collection. He says it's not much of a collection, it's more of a cabinet. He casually mentions he has a 61 Cheval Blanc, which blows Maya's mind. She asks him to get it, but he's waiting for the right person and the right occasion. He had previously planned to open it for his 10th wedding anniversary. Maya remarks that the day he opens that wine would become a special occasion in itself. He asks her when she got into wine. She says it's been 7 years. He tastes the Syrah and loves it. He asks her for her opinion, and she thinks it's overdone. Too much alcohol, and very little fruit. He takes another sip and agrees with her, rather impressed. Miles spots Stephanie's pictures with a little kid. Maya informs him that it's her daughter who is at her grandmother's house right now. She asks him if he has kids. He says he doesn't, because he would only screw them up. She says she doesn't have kids either. They move back inside and hear Jack and Stephanie excitedly laughing. Maya is curious about his novel and wants to know about it. He says it's called Day After Yesterday, and she remarks that it's about today. He is tongue-tied. Finally, someone who can stump Miles. She thinks it's great his novel is getting published. He sheepishly agrees. She says she's publishing her paper soon, since she's planning to go for a master's degree in horticulture. Miles admires her ambition. She asks him if she can read his book. He says he has a manuscript in his car. She offers to read it. There's an awkward silence and both of them don't make a move. She retires to the back porch and Miles follows her. They sit down, and Maya questions him about his affinity towards Pinot Noir. He says it's a hard grape to grow. It's thin-skinned and temperamental. It's not a survivor like Cabernet, which can grow and thrive anywhere. Pinot needs constant care and can grow in very specific areas of the world. He asks her about her interest in wine. She says she originally got into it because of her ex-husband, but then discovered that she has a sharp palate. This made her realize her ex was a fraud. Miles chuckles at her humorous jibe. She adds that it made her think about the life of wine. It's a living thing. She likes to think about what was going on when the grapes were growing, whether it rained or it was sunny. She likes to think about the people who picked the grapes. Those people would be deceased by now. If she opened a bottle today, it would taste different than any other day because it's actually alive and is constantly evolving. It peaks and begins its decline, but tastes so good. She holds his hand and looks into his eyes when she says this. He leaves her hand and says he also likes Riesling, not just Pinot. He excuses himself to go to the bathroom. Moments later, he comes out and finds Maya in the kitchen. He kisses her. She stops and decides she should get back home. She shows him the way and tells him she had a nice time. He asks her if she would still like to read his novel. He hands her 2 large boxes. She bids him goodnight with a peck on his lips. A few miles to go before he sleeps, I guess. He wakes up the next morning in his motel room, thanks to frequent calls from Christine on Jack's phone. Unbeknownst to Jack, who comes back in the afternoon gloating about his time with Stephanie, Miles spots Stephanie downstairs, on her bike, and hopes Jack hasn't invited her along for golf. Jack hasn't because he isn't planning to play golf either, and plans to spend the day with Stephanie. Miles brings him back to reality by informing him that he has several voicemails from Christine. Jack nervously calls Christine as Miles steps out of the room. Stephanie tells Miles that Maya had a good time the previous night, and he should give her a call. Miles doesn't react. Jack calls Miles back in to ask for a condom. The call to Christine went to voicemail. He leaves with Stephanie excitedly. Contrary to this energy, Miles spends his day alone playing golf and eating at the club. He comes back later in the evening to find Jack and Stephanie having sex in the room. Jack shoos him away. Later that night, Miles is at the motel bar, where Jack joins him and starts talking about how amazing his time was with Stephanie. Miles can't see his friend lose his morals and tries to give him another reality check. He asks him if he has told her about the fact that he's getting married on Saturday. Jack confesses he's been thinking of putting the wedding on hold. Miles is taken aback, but Jack wants to do the right thing. He might be in love with Stephanie. Miles isn't having any of it, but Jack tries to rope him into his fantasy. He requests that he move here with him and start a business together, but Miles thinks Jack has gone crazy. Little does he know it gets crazier when Stephanie comes to the bar and reminds him that they have to leave. They go to an arcade with Stephanie's daughter and mother. Miles watches Jack playing with her daughter in disbelief. Afterward, Jack leaves with Stephanie's family, and Miles is left alone for the night. Miles visits the bar where Maya works. He orders a bottle, but finds out Maya isn't working that night. He wobbles out of the bar drunk out of his wits. The next morning, Jack and Miles are playing golf. Jack tells him to strike when the iron is hot with Maya. He also asks him if he heard from his agent. He hasn't. Jack tells him to publish the book himself and offers to chip in for it. Miles is trying to take his shot, but Jack won't stop talking. He loses his cool and tells him to shut up, multiple times. Jack doesn't understand why he's being hostile. Just then, a ball hits them. Miles hits it back at the group of men who did it. The men get into their caddy and come straight towards them. Jack charges at them like a madman, which scares them off, and they turn back. As Miles and Jack walk out of the club, Jack again tells him to not give up on Maya. Miles doesn't want to talk about it, but Jack keeps talking about her. Miles thinks the moment she finds out he's not a published author, and he's a liar, she will lose interest in him. If a man doesn't have money at his age, he's out of the game. But Jack's intuition tells him that he will get good news this week about his book. Later they pick up Stephanie and Maya. Maya tells Miles that she heard he came by the restaurant the previous night, but she was busy with her class. She adds that it's good to see him today. He mimics her response and can't help but smile. Hopefully, that smile can stay on his face after Maya finds out the truth. They go to another wine tasting, but Stephanie starts getting bored with the sommelier's lecture. They go off on their own to explore the winery, which basically means Jack and Stephanie make out, while Maya and Miles talk in one corner. They go back to Stephanie's house that night and seem to be having a great time. Maya and Miles leave and head to Maya's house. Their chemistry is palpable, and they have sex that night. The next morning, Maya looks happy as Miles is sleeping on her bed. They spend the day together. She invites him over to the restaurant for lunch, and he accepts. Then she proceeds to ask him if he can stay the weekend since there's another wine tasting event. He nonchalantly mentions that he can't since the rehearsal dinner is on Friday. This is when he realizes what he has just said. Shortly after, Maya runs back to her car yelling at him for lying to her. But Miles says he could have continued lying to her even after his slip, but he decided he doesn't want to. Miles drives her back and Maya is pissed off about how Jack has been making huge promises to Stephanie. Moreover, Miles could have told her before, but he chose to do it only after he slept with her. He denies it, but Maya doesn't believe him. Before Maya gets out of her car, she tells Miles that she has spent the last few years moving past a marriage that was full of deception. She had been doing well. He responds by saying he hasn't been with anyone since his divorce, and being with her has been a big deal for him. He emphasizes the fact that he's not Jack. Miles returns to his motel room where Jack has ecstatically assumed that Miles has finally slept with Maya. However, Miles doesn't want to get into it. He has already divulged more than he had to. Just then, the phone rings, and Miles asks him not to answer. Jack picks up and realizes it's Christine. Jack tells her Miles is having another episode and takes him drinking again. Miles makes a call to his agent and gets the dreaded news from her. The publishing house has passed on his book because they don't know how to market it. Miles angrily goes back inside and starts to get drunk. He makes a scene when the sommelier refuses to give him the bottle, but Jack intervenes before things can get ugly and drags him out. Miles continues to sulk about the fact that the world doesn't care about his words. He's just an English teacher, not a writer. Half his life is over, and he has nothing to show for it. Jack thinks his words are beautiful and encourages him to believe he's a good writer. They come back to the motel where Stephanie is waiting for them. Jack has no clue what awaits him as Stephanie starts clobbering him with her bag. She curses him and continues beating the daylights out of him. Miles drives a bloody Jack to the ER while he accuses him of telling Maya about the wedding. Miles denies it. As Miles waits at the hospital, he calls Maya and tells her again about how much he enjoyed their time together. He's genuinely sorry about how things ended with them. He confesses that his book is not getting published. Jack comes out of the ER with a bandaged nose. He will have to undergo multiple procedures to fix his nose. He plans to sue Stephanie, but decides not to because he wants to protect Christine. Miles sarcastically calls him thoughtful. Back at the motel, they relax in the pool. Jack asks him again whether he said anything to Maya. He acts like he's trying to remember, but nothing comes to him. He's sure he didn't tell her, and doubles down on it. He gets angry at Jack because Maya will think ill of him now, just for associating with him. But Jack thinks it's fishy that Stephanie knew about the wedding being on Saturday. They go out for dinner, and predictably, Jack starts flirting with the waitress. He tries to play the actor card with her, even with his bloody nose. After dinner, Jack wants to stay back and hang out with the waitress. Miles thinks it's absolutely unbelievable that he's still unwilling to see the error of his ways. They could just hang out back at the motel. However, Jack tells him that he might understand literature, movies, and wine, but he doesn't understand his plight. Turns out that karma is quite a relaxing thought for Taylor Swift. Jack Cole. Later that night, Miles is sleeping when he is woken up by repeated knocks on the door. He opens the door to find Jack freezing. He gets inside and wraps himself in a blanket. He starts crying and says the waitress is married. Her husband works a night shift, but he came home early and caught them red-handed. Miles can't help but laugh whilst Jack cries at his new plight. The plight is the fact that Jack wants to go back because he left his wallet at the waitress's house. The wedding ring was in the wallet. It was expensive, and it took a long time to get it custom made. Miles refuses to accompany him, but Jack begs him to. He knows he screwed up, but he can't lose Christine. Miles feels pity for his sobbing friend and drives him to the house. But when they arrive, Jack tells Miles to go inside since his ankle is hurt. Miles doesn't want to but decides to do it. He goes in to find the waitress having sex with her husband. He locates the wallet in the bedroom and makes a run for it. The husband comes after Miles, but Miles gets back into the car just in time and locks the door. Miles feels a sense of accomplishment as he drives away. They stop at a gas station where Jack wants Miles to invite Maya for the wedding, but Miles thinks it won't be a good idea. Jack understands. He suddenly feels an urge to drive despite his injury. A few moments later, Jack drives the car off the road and crashes into a tree. Much to Miles's surprise, this was Jack's plan to make his nose injury look like it happened because of the accident. After getting angry about it, Miles realizes his car has been damaged, but not enough for it to look convincing. They decide to crash the car again, this time using a stone on the accelerator. It does the trick. They reach Christine's house. He explains to Christine that Miles wasn't hurt because he was wearing his seatbelt. The following day, Christine and Jack get married at a church. Victoria comes to Miles and introduces her husband. Miles tells him that he's a lucky guy. He agrees and offers to leave them alone to talk privately. She asks Miles how he's doing. He says it could be better or worse. She asks him about his book, and he says it was rejected everywhere. He is back to the drawing board. He congratulates her for getting married, and he's happy for her. Victoria won't be coming to the reception because she's not drinking. She announces that she's pregnant. Miles congratulates her again. He leaves immediately and goes to a fast food joint. He opens his precious bottle of Cheval Blanc and drinks it from a cup. The next morning, he is back to teaching and looks forlorn. When he returns home, he finds a voicemail from Maya. She has thought about everything and invites him to visit her. She didn't call him sooner because she was busy reading his book. She praises his novel and asks him if he actually went through the pain that was in the story. However, she is confused about the ending. She wishes him well and wants him to continue writing. The next day, Miles drives to Maya's house and knocks on her door.